Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. Today I have another Vice President of Marketing on, so it's great to have Patrick Ward on. Patrick is the Vice President of Marketing over at Rootstrap. Rootstrap uses outcome-driven development to help companies scale people, processes, and products. They've helped companies like Masterclass double revenue, and they've also taught Google how to run design sprints, which is quite commendable. His background is he's got like about 10 plus other digital marketing and content roles. Looking at your LinkedIn profile, I got a little bit dizzy, if I'm being honest with you. The amount of experience that you have is actually daunting. So congratulations there, you're doing great, clearly. And he's also got his own company called Nano Globals, which helps tech companies find remote workforces and put together multinational business strategies. So really happy to have you on today, Patrick. Thanks for coming on.
I really appreciate it, Andy. I'm really excited to be here.
Good. Tell me a little bit about your experience, man. Like your experiences. Whoa. So give us a bit of your background.
Yeah, so the way that I like to describe it is I started, like many marketers, in the advertising world. So originally working with agency clients, mainly in the insurance and travel space. That was where I started my career back in Sydney, which is where I'm from originally. But then I decided to chance my arm. And the best way to chance your arm is to go to the home of advertising, which is America. So I moved here right after college in 2016. Again, sort of floated between a couple of different industries, was in ad tech for a while, was also in finance for a while, but then finally really found my home in the tech space, specifically B2B services. And that's where I am right now. This world of software development, marketing fairly high ticket items, minimum deals, 150K. And I think that was just the natural intersection of my skills, where I realized very early on in my career that while I liked marketing as a function and how you could influence behavior, I also always wanted to tie it to a real world result. And that's where B2B services is a really interesting mix, because you're able to both do large campaigns over many, many months, but the reward is great. When you pull in a deal, like you mentioned a couple of them, like Masterclass, like Google, you get a lot of satisfaction by able to be a small part in that process.
Yeah, man, they're big blue chip ones as well. They're nice chunky ones to win as well as a company. How big is Rootstrap?
So Rootstrap is, right now we are 290 people. When I joined, we were at 60 people and probably about 4 or 5 million. Right now we're upwards of 18 million. And we're across many different countries. Our main two headquarters are Los Angeles and Montevideo, Uruguay. But we also have a large Argentinian presence, a large Colombian presence. Even on my team specifically within marketing, I've got people in Portugal, I got people in Costa Rica, I got a couple in the Philippines, like very multinational.
That's very multinational. That's nice, man. I say you learn an awful lot by being around so many different nationalities as well, right?
100%. And that's been the case for my entire career. Even when I very first started, I was an Australian working for a German client with New Zealand developers, and I was living out of Vietnam at the time. Like that type of crazy multinational experience, I think, is necessary for most marketers these days, because we are in a global marketplace, and being able to understand different perspectives, understand those nuances, because not everyone has the same expectations. I even see, Australians have a fairly laid back perception, and same as yourself being Irish, but then you come to America and you meet a fast talking New Yorker and it's like, oh wow, this is a different pace of business. So it's really important to understand those nuances. I think that's probably one of marketers' biggest superpowers, to understand why people think the way they do, and what is the context behind that, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to shape. We're trying to shape how they think about the brands and the companies that we represent.
Oh, for sure. I remember the first time that I started working in the tech space, which basically had my head nearly spinning off my shoulders, and then they started introducing me to Americans in the tech space, and then I thought the rest of my body was about to fly away. It was like the pace is just it's different. You just can't compare it unless you have some benchmark that you've experienced in terms of that pace. It's terrifying that first maybe year or two. I don't know if you felt the same, but
it's terrifying, but it's also very exhilarating. I mean, I found this, trust me, I loved growing up Australian. It gave me, you know, a wonderful bedrock and foundation, and certainly a calmness to life. Like I find that I get less stressed than most of my American counterparts because they always sweat the small stuff. And this is where I always love to lean on a VP of sales who gave me this one piece of advice for anyone going into the tech space. We're not saving lives, we're just selling software. And I think that is the best way to have a mentality coming into this space. But nevertheless, I think there is something about, you know, sharpening the sword. When you come into a country and start dealing with American clients who have, you know, really high expectations because they want to compete in a very aggressive market, then it makes you better and it makes you step up. And I think that was one thing that really drove me over here to America, because I found that, you know, more often than not, you know, we had a couple of clients back in Australia, but we could kind of, you know, sit on our laurels, not really do a whole lot, you know, kind of go through the motions. Whereas here, you know, you've always got to be on your A game. And, you know, I can see even in the, you know, now 6 years that I've lived here in Los Angeles, there's definitely been a dramatic improvement in my skills. And, you know, I look across to several of my peers who haven't had the same experience. I can tell you, it's not because I'm any smarter or brighter than them, you know, not even close. It's just, I put myself in those environments where you get tested. And when you get tested, that's where the real growth happens.
absolutely, absolutely. So growth happens outside the comfort zone, right? That's the thing. Okay, so look, you when you started at Rootstrap, there were 60 people. When did you start there?
So I started at the end of or middle of 2019. I actually came on as a consultant first, and then came on as the first full-time marketing hire for Rootstrap. Was basically tasked with building out the marketing function. At the time, they'd kind of done a classic owner operator story where one of the co-founders was the main salesperson, and that kind of got them enough of those early deals, you know, within the motivated entrepreneur space. But they came to me because I actually had previous corporate experience and knew how to sell into corporate, and that's where they wanted to go. They wanted to go up market to start getting some of those bigger clients. So they basically said, all right, Patrick, you're first marketer, figure out a plan, and if you can succeed, then you'll get as many people as you want. Well, needless to say, 2 years later, I have a team of 12 now across 4 continents. So yeah, pretty proud of myself of what I've accomplished in the last 2 years. But I think, you know, if I could give any one piece of advice to any budding marketing executive, because I know many mid-level marketers often, you know, think of like, what's the key to crack the code? This is it. It's where you need to go back to your marketing roots of knowing that if you're influencing customers' perception, you need to be influencing your executives' perception. Because at the end of the day, I see too many marketers, you know, they have all this information from all these different sources and they're chasing all these different shiny objects. You don't have to do any of that. You just need to figure out who are the powers that be in your organization and what do they care about. And whatever they care about, you feed that to them. And I can tell you that has made my skyrocket in my career to the top, because suddenly you're dealing with the metrics that matter rather than the vanity metrics. Don't try and explain marketing to a non-marketer. They won't care. Just explain what matters to them. You do this already for your customers. Why can't you do it internally?
For sure. And normally what matters to them is growth. And growth. So if you're able to attach what marketing are doing to the growth of the organization, be able to explain that in numbers, whatever the numbers are. I typically do it in pipeline growth or close one business. Then you're keeping your executive, the rest of the executive team at bay. They're happy. They know, okay, I can trust Patrick. He knows what he's doing. That's fine. And that word trust is so important, because there are so many marketers out there that are sending confusing messages by not being confident enough with what they're doing to make sure that and also trying to explain, as you said, don't try to explain marketing to a non-marketer. They're trying to do that, and what they're doing with that, creating confusion. And that the execs like, but I've seen this thing at a trade show somewhere, and the guy that was on stage said that we should be doing this. Or I read Aaron Ross's book, Predictable Revenue. Should we not be doing this? Or I read this book that's a bit like, hyperscaling or whatever, and you end up in this, like, the marketer that doesn't put their foot down and say, no, this is the way that we're doing it, because this is why it's making sense. And this is how it's gone towards this one number that's influencing our growth. And there's very few marketers that actually stand up and do that, right? So
not only do they not stand up and do that, but this is my philosophy. If you're getting those questions from your executives, you have not done a good enough job of showing why your efforts flow through to the number that matters to them. Because the second you do that, I saw this, again, I sympathize. I had this early on in my career, and everyone likes to have an opinion about marketing. Is the one field you would never see someone go to the finance person telling them how to run a profit and loss statement. You would never tell an engineer how to code, but for some reason, everyone thinks that they know marketing, and they often don't. But if you're getting those questions, it's because you haven't explained it all the way through to that number that matters. When you do that, when you're able to do that, suddenly those questions disappear. I can tell you the first time I felt this, it was like magic, because I'd showed the reporting, like any marketer and like any department, we need to show, reporting on an OKR basis, a quarterly basis, all the normal reporting cadences. But once you do it, there's no diving into the numbers. Now, I will say this, if things are going wrong, that's when people start diving into the numbers. But that's when you need to have built this foundation of trust. Because once you have that foundation of trust, even when things are going a little bit south, you're going to have that trust from your executive team to right the ship. But as soon as, we all know the adage that more sales, solves all problems. It certainly does. If you're on that growth trajectory, obviously your job as a marketer is make sure that sales don't take all the credit. But if it is going south, and it will, because every business goes through peaks and troughs, you need to have built that trust. Otherwise, you are going to get a laser focus, because that's people's innate tendency. They feel, like you said, I love how you explained it. Oh, I saw this one thing at a trade show. Oh, I read this one book. And that makes executives feel like they can be marketers as well, and they can't. And so the way that I'll give one tip and trick here. One thing I always like to do is an analogy that would make sense for an executive. So a classic example I use is something like attribution. A lot of people love diving into attribution and saying like, oh, there's, which channel is it coming from? Where do we put more investment? Now, most marketers will tell you an omni-channel approach is much more necessary for today's B2B buyer. So the way that you talk about it is I use the analogy of buying an investment property. And I use that because most executives have deployed capital in some investment property. And I point out all through the steps of that where, oh, marketing attribution wouldn't have caught that. That would have been miscategorized. That would have been attributed somewhere else. And when you start to do that in terms they understand, suddenly they know you've got your shit together, you know what you're doing, and they can trust you more with the function that they hired you for. That's really what it boils down to.
Sure. I like the analogy approach. I think that's really clever. It's also making it applicable to the executive as well, right? And coming down to their level is probably the wrong way of putting it, but going up to their level, I don't know, whatever way you want to put it, but yeah.
Well, let's talk about that, because we've got 3 different executives right now, so that I have to serve. I've got a CEO, a CTO, and a president. So my CTO just cares about that we are putting out good quality content around a technical audience. So what do? I loop him into the review process, making sure that he's seeing all this technical content going out and seeing that we're making sure that, it's not a non-technical person writing it. That's the thing that he cares about. My CEO, he cares more about our reputation building. So he's more seeing like, oh, are we getting more accolades in certain press? Are we getting more awards? And the president just cares about the bottom line. And so I show him the closed one. Now, all of those three gentlemen can see those different numbers, but by delivering the number that each of them individually cares about, suddenly you're building trust right across the board. And that way they're not going to be poking holes at you.
For sure, for sure. Okay, well, look, let's go through it, because you've managed to, the company has 5x in terms of employees in 3 years, which is wild. I've been on one of those rides myself, which is scary but great at the same time. There's one thing I want to focus on. You have 12 people on your team. What are those roles that you have in your team, or what departments?
Yeah, so I break it down into what I like to call 3 pods. So the first pod I have is my demand pod. That is run by my second in command, basically, my demand generation manager. That is a sales supporting function. So everything about that pod is focused on generating pipeline, certain demand campaigns, outbound, et cetera, et cetera. The middle pod is what I would call internal communications. So as you can appreciate, being a 290 person company, especially across so many different continents, information flow between different departments is critical. Finding out when certain projects have wrapped up, what did we do in those certain projects? Is there, is it qualified for a case study or a testimonial? Is there any lessons we can learn out of that particular problem that we solved that could be useful for the sales team? So all these sort of communications don't inherently happen as much as you can think it does in a small company. And we've all been in those small companies where you can just talk to the person in charge. Once it gets to a large, you need to build proper communication structures. So that pod is what that function is about. And then the final one is the emerging technology function. So this is our go-to-market team for services that are not in our core wheelhouse. So our core wheelhouse is custom software development, but those emerging ones are some fields like machine learning, which we just won our first client for a couple of weeks ago, which was very exciting, and some blockchain NFT type work. But below each of those 3 pods, and the way that I distinguish those 3 is just because I want each person outside of my department to know who to go to. I also have a bunch of shared services. So I have several virtual assistants, I have a designer on staff, I have a developer on staff, and I also have a paid acquisition specialist as well as an SEO specialist. So when you put all those together, it's a fairly nimble team, and that while there are certain, obviously, specific job titles. So, my main 2 people are my demand generation manager and my head of content. Needless to say that the department can be flexible at any time. And that's by design, because when you look at the incentives of how my marketing team gets managed, and I would encourage any marketing leader to try and get their team measured the same way, it's all about how do we hit the numbers that we need to together. And this avoids a really big problem, which is people not collaborating with each other because it's against their own interest. I really like the fact that we have a team goal, we have team metrics, and it doesn't really matter how we win those. And I think that's an acknowledgement, knowing that, look, in this day and age, you can't guarantee a certain channel is going to perform over another one. You need to run a lot of experiments. You need to see what's working, and what's working now might not work in 3 months' time or 6 months' time. But as long as you have that right mentality within your team and they're helping each other to achieve the goal, then they should all get compensated the same way at the back end. And I think it creates so much team unity. It means that, I've seen my team produce the results of, honestly, a marketing team 3 times the size of them. And that's by being able to rigorously focus on what matters most at any one time.
That's amazing. Yeah, I like the agile approach. I don't like the word agile, because agile sometimes means like just do all of the things all the time and don't have any type of direction. But like you've got a lean agile team, if I'm using bullshit bingo keywords here. But yeah, no, that's really amazing. You want to open up the bonnet a little bit and give us a look into what you're using from a tech perspective across the teams?
Yeah, totally. So tech, it's funnily enough not as crazy as you might think. In terms of, I mean, our CRM and marketing automation, it's standard HubSpot. We're sort of pushing at the doors of like, do we migrate over to, a Salesforce and one of the larger ones? I'm not really sure, but, HubSpot does what we needed to do for right now. In terms
you don't need to migrate. You don't need to migrate. Use Salesforce and HubSpot if you're going to use Salesforce.
There we go.
So sorry.
No, I appreciate that. Again, I honestly, this is sort of my main preoccupation of like figuring out, okay, we're starting to get to a particular scale where, systems are starting to break. So what makes sense for the system of the future for us? We certainly, when we're looking at like day-to-day, hunter.io is, our email scraping tool. We like to use Crystal Knows. This is a great one. I encourage every marketer to get Crystal Knows because it does a nice little psychoanalysis of anyone that you're reaching out to. And I think that's really important for figuring out how to influence a certain person's buying behavior.
Crystal Knows.
Yeah, Crystal Knows.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to have to check that one out. I haven't heard of it. Okay, keep going.
Yep. And then we also have, our site's pretty standard, built on WordPress. We have Zapier for any sort of integrations into Slack, which is obviously our main, communication channel amongst ourselves. And then we also use some anonymous website tracking like Leadlander on the back end just to for any of our campaigns. But yeah, it's not particularly crazy. In the future, we're definitely more heavily looking at Bombora at the moment for intent data. I think that's going to be probably our next big play. We've kind of been in this interesting debate around the terminuses, demand bases, 6 cents. And the consensus we've got is based on our size, we could probably just get away with Bombora because most of those platforms are actually just using a platform like Bombora and then overlaying stuff on the top of that. So
I can give you a tip that maybe you could look into. So if you're interested in a data tool alongside an intent data tool, ZoomInfo. So good. I think ZoomInfo actually use Bombora as their intent data tool built within the tool, and then you've actually crossed out the Hunter.io, which the data is fine with Hunter, but you outgrow Hunter is what I find. The data that you're going to get from ZoomInfo is by far the best. ZoomInfo are not paying me for this. Typically, if I say something, I normally recommend Cognism. By the way, I'm a big Cognism fanboy, but their intent data isn't as strong as ZoomInfo's. So if you're looking to solve an intent data problem and an actual data problem in terms of, I'm not saying you have a data problem, but emails and phone numbers and direct dials and so on, then ZoomInfo will have you covered there, and they play very, very nicely with HubSpot as well. So it's a bigger investment, but it's definitely worth it. And I'm already starting to see it with one of the companies that I'm working with. I'm already starting to see like they've implemented ZoomInfo and the intent data they've gotten, they've managed to book meetings like that. So it's worth it. But hey, look, I'm digressing here. Look, we're after running out of time almost. So Patrick, where can people find you? Best place to get you is where?
So the easiest place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. So it's linkedin.com/in/Patrick James Ward.
Perfect. Patrick, thank you so much for your time, mate. It's been great speaking with you, and I hope to speak with you again at some point in the future.
Thanks, Andy.
Cheers. Guys, it's been another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. Thanks for listening, and look forward to hearing from you again next week. See you, Patrick.
See ya.